operation.
She's on the stairs.
Okay, welcome everybody. This is a town hall meeting for the sole purpose of discussing problems with our lakes and potential solutions. All board members except Mike Dryblatt, who's on vacation, are present, and it's 9:05. Again, thanks for coming, and I want to introduce Brian Fisher, who is the co-proprietor of Lakes and Wetlands Company, which is the company which has been, among other things, contracted to maintain our lakes over this many years. And I'm going to ask Brian to come up and present to us in simple terms so we can understand it, although he's a very knowledgeable individual, what our problems are and what solutions he proposes at the quickest possible time and at the most economical costs, because we have some other big projects pending and we don't want this to break our bank, Brian. Okay. With that being said, Brian Fisher, and we're going to sit down there and watch as well.
I'll wait till everybody gets down. Good, right here. Test, okay. I'll wait till everybody gets seated and then I'll begin. All right. Good morning, everybody. I appreciate everybody taking the time, coming and learning, and I'll keep it very basic to try to make everybody understand, A, what we currently maintain and what we're contracted for. I'll go pretty quickly through the slides here, and I have a lot of photos at the end that we can go through. This is a presentation that we also have here for you, so if anybody wanted any additional information from it, Michael will have a copy of it as well for the office for April out there for you guys. So here is, we've been in business since '92, servicing a lot of South Florida waterways. Preferred vendor with South Florida Water Management, HOAs, golf courses, a lot of communities. Typically, lake management, new laws came in '95, and a lot of you folks have seen where you go to some communities, they have no planting, some have some planting, some have them all the way around, some just have sections. So you see, like in this community here, this side was not planted, but this side was required. The law requires 8 square foot plus a 5-foot buffer. A 15-foot shelf is what is legally had to been constructed for your lakes out here. And the lakes aren't lakes, you know, they're stormwater retention ponds. Look at all the flooding going on in Louisiana. They just had a storm based on 500 years ago. Our code, we build them based on a 100-year storm. So the worst storm over the last 100 years is how all the drains from the streets that go into the lakes. So every time it's raining right now, it's now washing nutrients into the lake, which adds a lot of nitrates and phosphorus. So here's a typical stormwater catch basin. This is your pond. Here is a normal water level. Here are your sod, and then you get aquatic plants that will grow. So when the water comes into the lake through the drain, then we have a weir that's a controlled structure to prevent flooding. So that's what these were designed. What we're doing is taking, as you see, there's no plants, there's no fish, there's no birds. It's just an empty pit that is dug out to build up the land to build the houses on. And what we then do is turn them into an aquatic environment, like a fish tank. And I'm sure many of you have, over the years have had a fish tank. So I'll try to keep this related to that. So here is what we see a lot of times is you get a lot of excess nutrients that wash into the lakes that get all different types of algae. Not all algae is bad. There is healthy algae as well. And on the littoral shelves with that 15-foot shelf that's required, the builder cannot go less than that. So you have to have that shelf. That's what was designed for your community here. However, if they go bigger with the shelf, where you see some of the plants may extend out 20, 30 feet, and we'll show you some photos, or 40 feet, That's legal to the code. It's then what would we like to do to address these situations? Because we're contracted to take care of all the bad weeds, weeds that weren't originated here in Florida, came from other countries. Hydrilla is the #1 exotic weed that we do have to maintain under the water. So here we have an aquatic environment going on, and pretty much we want to keep the algae under control. And if you notice back here in this community here, they don't have any plants. So all you're doing is constantly adding herbicide, treatments, algae, aquatic growth. So here, we come out here once a month for your lake maintenance. We're out here 2 times a month for the maintenance, but each lake gets visited once for the algae treatments and another time for exotic weeds such as your torpedo grass. So picture your lawn, if you don't mow it in a month's time, how tall it gets. Well, it runs runners into the lakes, and we got to make sure that we keep all the bad weeds out of the littoral plants that are required within your waterways. So here, we cannot install grass carp, which I've only installed 2 times in 24 years. They eat underwater weeds such as hydrilla. They don't like algae, but they're not selective weed eaters. They would then eat a lot of the beneficial plants. Here you can see a littoral shelf. These got lily pads, spatadoc. Spatadoc can grow completely across the lake. Like we've seen in the big lake, we've done several treatments. What's underwater, our normal treatment would not affect it. If we're using a residual use herbicide that has long control, it goes in the water almost like chlorine in a pool. You don't have to go and spray the top, but it has to go throughout the whole water body. That's Sonar herbicide, and that controls various different plants that we'll be talking about. So our method for treatments is herbicide, which is the most effective. We bring out either a boat, an ATV, handback. I'm sure everybody has seen a little of all throughout the years. And then we also have manual removal and the biological control. And when we get into the fish stocking, we will show you. This is a community that had an underwater weed called hydrilla. So hydrilla could grow 60 feet in depth. It grows 1 to 3 inches a day in the summertime, especially you get a fertilization runoff. So when we have a shelf that's 30 feet out, is only 2 feet deep, within 1 month time, that entire 30-foot shelf could have this plant. We have a native plant underwater, like a fish tank. When you get the fish, you add the gravel, you get artificial plants. We have several different native plants that we leave to compete against the bad plants like the hydrilla. So here you can see they're doing a little manual removal and then could follow up with a treatment. This is something that can be added as a service. We've done some manual removal, but it isn't part of our current maintenance agreement for all of these years. So here you can see a lake just getting fully choked out from algae. This is here is an underwater plant causing a lot of algae, especially when the fish go to spawn throughout spawning season. So as I mentioned, the algae is a byproduct of all the excess nutrients, everything from the stormwater washing in. Fertilizer is one of our biggest culprits. Getting grass clippings in, you can't stop it. It's part of the maintenance. You have to cut down to the water's edge or just try to leave a little buffer. But at a certain point, if you don't mow them, then you'll have weeds growing as tall as we are. So here we have aquatic plants. We have the floating plants that we have to contain with, submersed plants that we contain with. The tape grass is native, Cara is native, and we have a lot of that in a lot of your waterways. They only like to grow in depths less than 3 feet. So as shallow as your shelf is, this would grow. And then we have the emergent plants that we maintain, which are the flowering plants. And then there's only one plant in here that doesn't flower, which is the spike rush, which is the grassy, and we'll be getting to that here very shortly. So here's doing treatments on a buggy. You see the blue copper sulfate. The label is the law, so we have to follow the guidelines. So in certain areas, if we have depleted oxygen levels because the plant is dying, we may not be able to do an algae treatment, have to wait in between treatments to perform them. So these are the different herbicides that we use, and they all have to have a label to be applied in the water. So I'm sure everybody's heard of Roundup to spray the weeds in your pavers, along your beds. We use an aquatic Roundup called Rodeo. To get that label on the label costs $14 million and a lot of time, and the price is almost twice the cost to have an aquatic label with the same active ingredient. It's just that one has a surfactant, the other doesn't. So Roundup and Rodeo is made from Monsanto, the same manufacturer, which is glyphosate is the active ingredient. Here is what we have proposed, which is Sonar. This 1 gallon jug is $2,100, name brand. like Lipitor, in a sense. We have generic brands that are less expensive, that doesn't cost as much, but we get a warranty from the manufacturer when we use the sonar. The same company manufactures the generic, and there's a new company out that also manufactures generic, and every time a new company manufactures, this company, C-Pro, comes out and usually buys them out and raises both pricing. So when I started, it was $1,100 a gallon for the name brand. 24 years later, it's $2,100 per gallon out there. But it gives you almost, and I have to update this because here it's $1,600 per gallon, so that's when it was an old price that we had here. But when using the sonar, it's a slow release. It does not dissolve the oxygen. It targets the bad weeds. It takes 90 days to see if you're getting good effect from it, and it takes about 6 months to really say, wow, the lakes are really looking good from using it. It's a wonderful product, but when we get into heavy raining season, if the water is outflowing because it comes up your sod line, then it dilutes our product. So this product, when the best time to normally apply it is in the early spring when active growing, but it's weird this year because early spring we got so much rain and we diluted a lot of the communities that had used it, so we had to just keep adding more to it to keep the ingredients high enough, keep the antibiotic in the system to hopefully get rid of the hydrilla and or some of the other problems that we contain with. So this is a wonderful product that works out there. It takes a while, and you'll see some before and after photos. Service report we leave after every visit telling you which lakes and what we had performed on. Fountains and aeration, we've talked about this in time. You've got a beautiful decorative fountain in the big lake. It doesn't aerify. So we have different types of aerators that we use, and some of the other communities have used here is our mushroom aerator. It pumps 1,100 gallons a minute. This will help reduce algae within the ponds. The biggest problem we have is getting electric to it. However, there's potential volunteers. We're working, trying to see if FPL and we could get a box, a meter put on a home to volunteer to be able to run the electric to it so that we could run these. All these others are decorative. So just like a fish tank, not going to keep the fish alive without the bubblers. However, we have oxygen introduced to the lakes through all the aquatic plants that we have. So from the sunlight penetrating through the plants, photosynthesis helps produce the oxygen in the water. So that's our oxygen, but nothing's moving it. So when the water levels are low and they're not moving at all, you'll see algae to build up, especially when the fish need to spawn. So just think about as many fish that we have in the lakes all create little spawning beds, and then when the water levels are lower and you walk down to the lakes, you could probably see those because they also do a lot of uplifting of the plants to help provide shade for them in that shallow ponds. So these are the different aeratings. This is a underwater aerator. This one here, you hear the surface of the water. This one has a compressor. This, to me, is great in lakes that are deeper than 12-foot depths, but they don't circulate water, so you can still get some floating material. This, look at all the ripples you get in the water. Each one handles about 1.5 acre pond. And this here is a smaller aerating and a fountain, but it only pumps about 350 gallons a minute compared to 1,100. So now we have our littoral shelves, which is one of the big concerns out here, because in a perfect world, if it was constructed to 15 feet and if the lake got deep, like in the earlier picture, these plants would never grow further into the lake. However, the guy, when he constructed the machine, when he were excavating, there's no houses on the property, it's just the dirt that they're making the ponds. And if this extended out to here, then these plants will grow out to there if that water was 2 feet or less. So in a lot of the different lakes here, we have different widths of different plantings due to what was out here. And these were native, so having these plants help filter all the excess nutrients that wash into the lake. So this is like a water filtrating system. However, it does shrink the lake and take away from potential open water view. So there's the pros and the cons with some of the plantings. So you can see how big, this is a big giant littoral shelf wetland. Some communities, like Bellagio, they have big giant wetlands on a lot of the lakes that the people live behind. It's the Everglades, truly huge football fields wide. Even the new Valencia Reserve has some lakes have no plantings. A lot of the lakes have full plantings like you have, and some of the lakes have wetland areas throughout a lot of the cul-de-sacs and open water. So here you see how uniform this planting is because the water gets deep out here. And if down the road, if the plan is to reduce the amount of spike rush, well, maybe we could look to introduce all flowering plants and eventually potentially eliminate the spike rush, which you'll see in some of the other photos here. So this here is that, and which is nice, is because we've, for 4 months now, 3.5 months, Valencia Palms did a spike rush reduction program. They now added some additional services to their ponds to help get rid of a lot of the excess spike rush. But what happens is we have underwater native plants like a fish tank, as I had mentioned. And if you see all this floating material here, that's native tape grass, and you have a lot of tape grass throughout your lakes. Here's it zoomed in. So after, and this had spike rush growing all the way out to where all of this is. So this here down is only 2 feet, 3 feet deep at max. And then in the open water, you can see there's nothing there, but the wind was blowing. And the water level dropped, so where we have a lot of fish that migrate, now this shelf here is 15 feet wide all the way around. They did not opt to use sonar herbicide yet, because the sonar herbicide could help eliminate this and keep it off-season, dormant, and still have a clean, free water. However, the natural characteristic of this tape grass, because this is what we could see if we're not going to then use sonar, if we're going to look to reduce the spike rush in your lakes. So here, they had an option to then come in and skim it out. Now, if we're going to use sonar herbicide, we're not allowed to skim it out. We got to wait 90 days to see results. Now, every lake doesn't have tape grass here, just like the other one, but the ones that do it, we would either have to address it or just let Mother Nature and time take care of it. So here is what it's now looking like. And this is after close to 2.5 months. So it's almost like a giant grass clipping, because the fish went down into the area when we walked and we removed a lot of the spike rush. From removing it, you step on a lot of the spawning beds. So the fish are going to go back and recreate their spawning beds. And the water levels, as we know, until the recent rains that we've been getting, started dropping the ponds. So the fish moved further into the lake, and they were making their spawning beds. So you could see most of it's open, but you could still see some residue of the tape grass. Once that tape grass is floating, and tape grass naturally releases, because what this also did during the spawning is giving shade from the hot sun. We've been having record heat, 100 degrees, and this water, remember, is only 2 feet deep to 3 feet all around this whole entire big lake like we have out here, and plus some of the other waterways. So the rain came because it started to disintegrate, and they weren't paying for the extra treatments. They said, well, let's go ahead, and they were getting a lot of the residents concerned with it. And fortunately, we had the heavy rains, and it dissipated, and it knocked it down. They're still going to use sonar herbicide, but they're afraid now if we're going to be getting every afternoon rain and we're getting the high summer rain, it's not the optimal time to use sonar herbicide. However, the lake is looking much better. So here you can see all the spike rush was removed again, all in the shallow and around. And we have mainly flowering plants now. It doesn't look it, but that's 13 feet in the smaller lakes and 15 feet on the bigger lakes. Because once again, the county wants 8 foot plus a 5-foot buffer to be maintained out there. And that has a lot to do with our water fluctuation and also the wildlife that uproots a lot of the areas. And that's the after photo. So you have the algae, doesn't mean you have to stick with it. They didn't even do any treatments yet. They were just approving the treatments, and the heavy rain came. They said, well, let's now hold off the treatments, and the lakes are looking beautiful now just from the rain, and that's what it looks like. This picture is as of last week. This here was in the lake for about 6 weeks with all the tape grass, which looked like that, which died to form algae, and then once the rain came, it dissipated the algae, and now it had a clean waterway. But this is what the lakes would look like uniformed if we go forward with the reduction of the spike rush. Here's the spike rush in the community here where we did the test area. So all of this in here is due to fish spawning, the water levels dropping, so the fish that may have been further up are moving further down below. And we do have an underwater native plant there. We came in with our amphibious machine, which has a clam bucket digger, and we could dig out selective areas like we did a test here, and you could see all the material that we then had to haul off the property. Very labor intense, and now we got to see is if it's deep enough where the spike rush will not grow back. So we're monitoring, we're testing things to see what is going to be our best management practice to hopefully achieve both goals. reduce the amount of spike rush. Because once again, 15 feet out means we could remove all of this spike rush and create that uniformed line. The problem is from here all the way in is only 2 to 3 feet deep. So we would have to make this 5 foot deep in order for the spike rush not to grow in. Or they didn't dredge over at Valencia Palms, they just did the haircut. We got rid of it, and now they added an extra service where we come out once a month and spray the rodeo, which is the aquatic Roundup, for any new growth that grows back. However, we do have the opportunity to make the ponds a little deeper. And here's another angle showing you where. The problem also then lies is getting the material out. The machine either has to drop it in the water and rake it all out, because if the machine keeps coming in and out and dropping it, it ended up damaging a lot of the littoral shelf that is still required to be there. So here's all of the native plants here, which we could have mostly the flowering ones. You see, you've got the arrowheads with the white flower, you got the purple flower pickerel, needs to be in a good 6 inches of water. These we don't have here because they get too tall and brown, which is called thalias. But we also have some of the other swamp lilies, which have an upside down white flower. So now we have also projects that over the years, we're getting some shoreline erosion. Once we do the removal of the spike rush in some of the areas, unless we dredge, which is very expensive and time consuming, we could go ahead and fix some of the embankments and use this material outside the legal shelf and pump this into our shoreline, called our dredge sock material. Over time, I've got a lot of our communities are doing 10-year projects on the shore socks. So the erosion, fish spawning, undermining there, you get a lot of water fluctuation. So here's a lake that has no plantings in a lot of older communities. Look how many spawning beds, hundreds of them. They have an underwater tape grass. So that's all tape grass that they have as under their treatment program. We do not treat the tape grass, but it can be treated if it's optimal, because the tape grass hides in the same water as the spike rush does. The only time you see it exposed in the shallow is where you have voided areas where the fish like to spawn. So that is there, and this is the lake that is half planted with no erosion, and this other side is all beginning some erosion. And then here, excessive treatments, high burns would also kill off the grass. So I'll just breeze through because these are just some of the other products that were out there for the erosion. But on the right side is our shore socks and the dredge sock material. But here, I'll just pass through. Once again, this is a new planting. So a lot of you folks, when we originally planted the lakes, we only planted about 6 feet out because the plants migrate out to the shelf. But you can see how thick and full. And once again, you see how uniform this is? The lake gets deep, these plants will never grow forward. So if we get to the legal area and we could go deep enough, but instead of holding the material out, fix erosion years to come, we could then kill 2 birds with 1 stone. And then here is the shore socks material, and here we could either plant into it or put the grass. I'll just pass through it fast in here. And this is showing us just laying out the material, filling it, which we've done originally with a little pine straw, and covering it up. Well, instead of the pine straw, we can now go into, and I'll show you here, because I know we're pressured for time, so I'll just get right into the dredge sock. So here's all the major erosion area. Here they filled it all with the sock. You can see how strong building a wall with our sock, but we could even pump in, if we didn't have good dredge materials, which here we could pump in mulch into there, and that's almost pure dirt going right into the sock and putting grass over. But here is the Valencia palms. You see how nicely uniform the plants are? Because we completed the spike rush reduction program. And everybody was ecstatic. They all loved it. What they didn't love was the amount of tape grass and algae that followed for the next 3 months as the board was contemplating getting approvals. Board members were out of town to approve the sonar. They just approved it, but once again, Mother Nature, a good rainstorm, dissipated a lot of that floating material. So they're holding off until we see that we're out of the rainy season. But here, we're pumping that shallow area. So where we had the dredge attachment to just clam bucket, this thing is a vacuum. And it's vacuuming up all the soot and sediment. And we could go almost 8 foot deep, 9 foot deep with our dredge. So here, in time, we start filling our sock. So here, we just dredged out in front, this was a 50-foot section. So we dredged out 50 feet in front of the spike rush so that that spike rush now is hopefully deep enough that material went into our sock material. And we could go wider if we need to capture more sediment if we want to remove in the future. And then we put grass. So here you could see the erosion cutout that they had and the washout. So when you start getting a drop off, we're no longer in a graded slope because they're designed to be able to walk in and walk out of the pond. And that shelf, 15 foot wide, was designed as a safety feature first because years ago, 4 foot only had to be a foot deep. And when that 4 foot eroded and you had a 20-foot pond and hydrilla grew and you fell in, you're getting stuck, you're choking in the hydrilla because you couldn't step up and walk out. So the shelves have gotten from a 4 to 1, 6 to 1, 8 to 1, 10 to 1, meaning 10 foot out's a foot deep. Now it's 15 foot was a 1.5 foot design in your community. So here is a finished product of fixing the shoreline. We could also reclaim because the cannas grow up the embankment, which is the yellow flowered one, and they could get pretty tall. Well, that could be removed, and we could always go further out. So we could reduce some of the littorals from the sod line forward and from the spike rush back over time. And then here's the machine showing you in here, once again, pumping out that shallow sediment. So as long as we're deep enough, that spike rush will never grow back, and it's going to be deep enough where we won't even have algae growing in that little area. But here is 1,000 feet of shore socks. So you can see the material all the way around the pond here, because all the erosion just keeps going greater and greater. So at a certain point, when does one get prepared for the assets? There's a big article coming out in the National Journal with the CAI. They did a feature article with us and talking about a lot of the different problems within Florida. So the major thing is having these plants is a good thing. Keeping them uniform, it's an expense. So no different than right now, picture us, we're just in here cutting your lawn, but you're not trimming trees or doing the hedges. We have the option to do that, but it does get expensive cutting the trees and the hedges. However, seeing the folks from Valencia Palms, they're all overwhelmed. Every pond we went and did the reduction of all the spike rush. Now that the algae's gone and they're seeing a light at the end of the tunnel because they thought they would have to live with the tape grass and the algae, I said, A, Mother Nature, or B, start going with the additional service, which they've begun. We're spraying back so none of the spike rush ever grows back, but then any algae treatments, it's just some additional service out there. So here is the pond after the sod. So you can see there, and we just sodded this last week out there, and it's already growing in nicely and green. There's no more erosion. You see how nice the lake is because we did get some rain at the same time. And now from here to here, the width of the sock is what we were able to vacuum out. Problem is in some of the lakes, we got 20, 30 feet wide. So depending on where, and we can only pump 300 feet away. So wherever we're working, that would be a project as we want to do the reduction. You may not have the erosion, but you want to reduce it. Well, then it's preventative maintenance. We don't have to reclaim, but I could always build it up on the hillside because we could adjust our materials that we would like to use. So here's the preserve. We know we just had the incident where we had the preserve area. Here you want to keep the preserve free and clear of exotics as well. These are the bad trees that we get in Florida. So here's a new planting in a preserve area. So the plants here are a baby, but these things are going to get 30 feet tall in the future. And here is a big wetland out there. Some of these cove areas are extended. So we have options in our amphibious machine that we can use to be able to achieve the goals that the community and the board would like to go on. And then we have the wildlife. We have everything. Unfortunately, the birds with the fish, Florida is known for alligators, snakes. We do get water rats in Florida. It's everywhere. Addison Reserve has 1,000 traps set up throughout all their subdivisions along their golf course. Just part of Florida, unfortunately. But you have from the eagles, the hawks. So these plantings, the ones that are above the water are for the birds and the wildlife. The ones that are underwater are more for the fish and all the different various fish. We have a beautiful bass. The more plants, usually the healthier it is. And once again, knowing good algae to bad algae, knowing the tape grass, Cara, which is a good algae, it's an aquatic plant form, unfortunately almost looks the same. So here's all the different fish that we have in the lake, and we have mosquito fish that can help eat larvae. Good news is when the water level is up, you don't have standing puddles. The larvae will also like to develop at the muck on the bottom of the lake. Those aerators will help also reduce the sediment over years, and the sediments build up from all the plant decaying from all the years building up muck layers on the bottom of the ponds. So we have best management practices. So if they blow the grass clippings up the embankment, reduce algae in the shallow areas, fertilizing, not to the water's edge, try to at least 10 to 25 foot buffer depending on the areas, encourage vegetation along the shoreline, but the amount is up to you guys to decide. And then this is us, we're here in Boynton Beach. Anytime there's any situations, we do come out. A lot of the calls we do come out and look at is things that A, were not part of our contract. B, when you treat a herbicide in a plant, it's like, just think of it like a human body. You know, some antibiotics take a month, some you need to be on 10 days. Our herbicides take anywhere from 2 weeks to 3 months to do it. So if you don't fully understand the ecology of the waterway, that's what I'm here for, or my staff and my team could help provide. And then I have 3 photos that we took just showing you fish that were caught within the ponds throughout the area. And Michael's gonna pull them up just to show you. And it also shows you during when the water levels were low. Here's a beautiful bass right here. As you see, that's gotta be about a 6-7 pound bass. And if it goes to the next photo. There was 1 more or 2 more. But this other one is just a true beauty. Right there to the left. And then I'll show you that there is a 10-pound bass. That's from these ponds. So when people say we don't have fish, so when you see spawning beds, the big bass, deeper the water. So the deeper the bass, and typically the depth of the pond creates the size of your bass. So we have all these ponds on average are only about 6 to 8 foot deep, depending on the water level and the time of the year. The deepest part of these ponds are 12 foot and no more than 14 feet. So usually a 10-foot pond could get you a 10-foot bass. A 4-foot pond will only give you almost about a 4 foot. And now here, this is drought season. So here, smaller bass he caught, but you see this is all land? Well, this is the entire littoral shelf. The entire 15-foot is dry, and these are called wetland plants. So the reason we have that extra 5-foot buffer is plants need water to survive in their wetland zone. So like the spike rush can't grow out any further into the pond. You can see it's all uniform, this spike rush here. These plants, like the pickerel weed, the purple flowered one, will go right back down to the tuber, and then we got to wait till the next rainy season and hopefully not have a cold front that could freeze out the pickerel for 2 years to come back. Every year we do fill in some plants because we do maintain, legally you have to maintain minimum of 80% coverage. So the county here, this wouldn't get any coverage. So they'll give you in a little extended here saying, okay, we know the water fluctuates. And once again, where you have a spawning pool bed right there, well, where are all the fish? This was their home. Now they're creating it all in here, which is then uprooting, whether it's the underwater tape grass or the spike rush. And then there was just the big giant 10, and that was it. So this is an entire aquatic environment that we turned the ponds into, which were maintained and really built to handle the rain and the runoff so you don't have any flooding. I appreciate everybody's time on the presentation. And I'll open for some Q&As if anybody has some questions. Yes? Well, over the years, the spike rush has been the biggest issue of how wide. So, and making sure that we're not going to take something that may be an eyesore and trade it for something that's a worse eyesore if we do not have a proactive budget to maintain what will follow. So if dredging is not the option right away from after removing the plants, then a maintenance program would be needed. And whether that's on an as-needed basis, because we do drive-through inspections. So when we removed all that spike rush at Valencia Palms, you saw all that floating material that was on the surface. That was out there for almost 2.5 months because we didn't have any rain, helping to dissipate it. And the water level dropped, so that fish, like I showed in that last picture, migrated and made all new beds, uprooting all that plant sitting on that surface. Whether they then wanted to pay for us to mechanically remove it, it was just an additional service cost. So we have proposals out for the board for all different multiple services to come in, just like we did at Valencia Palms, mark and put out measuring sticks, so you guys will see where the stick is at 15 feet, or the interior lake's 13 feet, and then go ahead and remove. We would spray out everything growing outside the 13 to 15 feet. It'll be all dead. And once we see it's all dead and killed the root, we would then come in with our two boats. One's the We Do boat that you guys saw us when we did another demo of cutting out the plants. And the other one, I had that same underwater cutting attachment as well. So we'd have both boats out here cutting, scooping, putting it on the shoreline, hauling it off the property. And then whether we want to decide to start the maintenance program, I would recommend then we would immediately begin spraying every month, respraying all the new growth, because nothing sterilizes the soil. You cannot remove it, and we still have runners that will start continuing to grow. But we can maintain it without any problems. It's just making sure there's the right budget to be able to maintain so that you don't see algae like we see right now in some of the areas. That's a natural occurrence here in Florida. So unless that pond goes deep enough, then it's just an ongoing maintenance program. So instead of once a month lake pond service, we'd be here twice a month for each lake, which means we'd probably be here every week instead of 2 times a month. Because one time we'd be treating all the bad stuff, and then the other time I got to go out and now treat all the regrowth of what's growing either above the water or under the water. That Sonar herbicide, it's just the best herbicide on the market that controls a lot. We did it in one pond over at Valencia Palms, a smaller one, to show them. We use the Sonar in some of the ponds out here that are smaller, part of our maintenance program. But I couldn't afford on myself to go ahead and put Sonar in all the waterways. I would need a year's worth of the contract just for almost the Sonar herbicide. Forget about everything else, the amount of labor intensiveness that we do out here. And once a month, we're out here taking care of the littoral plants, and that's keeping tall cattails. You don't see any vines growing through them. So we're out here maintaining and keeping all of your littorals in compliance. So budgets are out on the table for everybody to then review, to be able to pick the different services to give you that aesthetic look. And as I had mentioned with Paul, you could always speak to them over at Valencia Palms, and they could tell you right now they have not done anything other than us respraying any of the new spike rush. But they did not begin the Sonar program, and their lakes look pretty good right now just from the rain.
Question over
dissipating
here.
it. Yes.
You mentioned during your presentation aerators that kind of look like little fountains, and you said something about having to get electricity to them.
Yes.
I have a multi-part question. Number one, if a homeowner says, okay, you can, connect the aerator for my lake, to the house or whatever, do you have any indication of what it would cost per month to run that aerator? And secondly, what is the approximate cost per aerator to put into a lake?
The aerators with installation, getting the the line, also depends on how many feet of a run we have to run. So if it's 50 feet out to a house in the pond, or do we have to go 400 feet? So Valencia Point, right across the street, we had one that ran 600 foot in electric line because nobody did it at the house, and they had an electric source off the main road. So they ran it to have it even in the pond. They ran one at 300 feet and one at 600 feet out there. But a typical, if we were able to get here, it would probably be less than 200 feet, I would imagine, or a 100-foot run. So you're probably looking right around that $2,500 cost on the unit installation, and then you have the electric that needs to be hooked up. An electrician would have to then get a separate meter hooked up to the house, and they run approximately, and running them 24 hours is the best over at Valencia Point. The only noise you hear on that one that we have is the water. It sounds like a waterfall. So they said, well, can we turn it off a couple of times during the day? Valencia Shores went through the exact same thing. They tried turning it off, and the algae started developing back. When they ran it 24/7, we had less than 3% algae reoccurrence within the pond. So the electric runs around $40 a month on the units itself. And I believe the association was looking to, if it's a separate meter, to be able to then address and potentially pay for the cost of the meter.
Yes, we have. First, I had wanted, getting to that, does our sprinkler system run off of an electric box? The sprinklers? Could we hook it, the clocks, could we hook up to that instead of to a home? Right, so we do have electrical. Right, but
Yes.
in case we don't have a homeowner that would be willing to do a box on their home, we do have other options to hook it up to. I understand that. I'm just saying there are the other options. My other question is, you were talking about adding the flowering plants. Are we not making the lake smaller each time we're not digging it out and moving it back and just adding things to, adding to the
Well, in the first,
buffer?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, to that.
In the first 13 feet, you're not supposed to see any water. That's supposed to be a thick hedge of aquatic plants. After 13 feet, that can be removed. And that's what we were looking. After the 13 feet is mainly all the spike rush grass. So the plants that are there, they're supposed to be thick and full. But when the water level's up, fish will spawn and migrate within them, creating little channels, because those plants protect from that big bass eating newly spawned fish at the same time.
And we're sure that it's that it's a 13-foot code for our community? That
Yes,
it's, yeah,
yes.
okay.
And that was all confirmed with the Environmental Resource Management Department in Palm Beach County. Yes. Yes.
Question, what that lady was talking about. We've had a problem for 5 years. Every time we complained, someone came out with more, and I don't know technically what to call the grass or the aquatic or whatever. No one ever came back to cut it down, to look at it. There's never been a boat in our lake for everyone who lives on Malta. But we're at the end. So when we bought our house, we started with a beautiful lake. 1 year later, they put so much in there that we don't have a lake. So my question to you, according to what you're saying, 13 feet, our bushes or whatever's in that lake, which is very dangerous and horrible, is probably about 20 feet
So then,
because they took away our lake.
yeah, and proposals are in to be able to potentially do the reduction to bring it back to 13
Then what
feet.
took 5 years? They could have sent someone in to cut it down.
Well, you can't legally cut, trim, or hedge the first 13 feet because
Well,
all the
it's
dead
longer
material
than
is what
that,
it is.
Bruce.
Anything out would then just be an extra proposal, so it's
Okay,
not part
but
of, it's not part of my current
It
maintenance
is so
program.
frustrating.
And that's what I believe.
And the
we're here
whole
today
lake,
to
I'm not
discuss.
just talking about my house,
It's
anyone
it's
on
every lake.
Malta.
It's just about every lake in the community, and
Well,
proposals have been submitted.
If someone would come to our house as you have been,
Yes.
it is 100 times worse now. Because no one even, it is such a wreck that we can't even go outside and look at the backyard.
Well,
5 years worth of throwing more and more in.
well, the only thing we're putting in is the short flowering plants
No.
because we have to keep
No,
compliant.
high.
Well, those are the cannas, and they
Well, no one-
die off and they change over after
No
season.
one trimmed it.
We also have a proposal for excessive heights on
Honey,
it. That's not part of my
we have
maintenance
listened to
program.
proposals
Sure.
from many people here for 5 years.
I'm not the one that could say yes,
You're
though.
right. But my question was, if you said 13 feet and it's out 20 feet.
Yes.
Who's doing anything at our lake?
As far as removing those plants, nobody, because that's not a maintenance. That plant is actually healthier to have for
Which
the water.
plant? They put
The
many
grass
different
that's-
ones in it.
The
and
grass that's
covered
growing
up-
outside the 13
And
feet.
covered up our lake.
Yeah.
Thank
Well,
you.
well,
Just a question and a comment.
Yes.
The question is, what's the difference in cost between the generic product and the non-generic product? Is it appreciable?
Yeah, it's about $400. They're using the generic product over at Valencia Palms.
Okay.
I use the generic product myself unless the community wants that guarantee warranty because, once again, It could be the prime season. I put it in. We got a 7-8 inch rain event. Water levels came up. It outflowed out. It dilutes the product. We got to take a water test, send it to the lab up at CPRO. They'll then tell you, you know what, you don't have enough. You need to add another 1 gallon or another quart or another half gallon. It works. When it have optimal conditions, nothing works better.
And then a question in form of a comment. When we look out at the lakes that surround the clubhouse and so on,
Yes.
and you have this lovely swath of planting,
Yes.
that's acceptable, I would assume. In other words, there are plantings that run along the edge of the lakes that are acceptable. There's nothing wrong. As a matter of fact, it's desirable to have that, you're saying. Is that correct?
Yes, it's a native beneficial plant. It's in the shallow waters. Everything that washes into the lakes, the plants help absorb it. The spike rush are hollow, so even with the rain, each plant helps and stores water at the same time. It all comes down to an aesthetic issue. Yes.
Your explanation is very detailed. It lost me a long time ago. But I'm concerned with the past. Are you the company that's been taking care of our lakes in the past?
We've been maintaining them since we planted the plants
Okay.
in.
And you, sir, after you do anything, which I'm on a lake, I've never seen you people do any work. That's, maybe I'm not home to see it, okay?
Right.
You put in a report that you've done such and such.
Correct.
And I assume somebody from the HOA or the castle management has been monitoring your work.
Correct, and we do
watching to see what you
drive-throughs
do.
every month. We do drive-through inspections with Robert, with Paul. We'll drive around the ponds a minimum of 9 times, 6 to 9 times a year. We're out here many times coming out and meeting with homeowners and explaining the unfortunateness is what you want done is just not part of our maintenance agreement. And that's what we're here discussing on adding new services to
Yeah,
our
I'm not sure
agreement.
what you've been doing, but you did say you file a report every time.
Yes.
So if I go to the office, I will find as many reports as you said you
Oh,
could.
of course, and
Okay.
we're inspections, treatments. You get 2 reports every month. You get 2 reports from our technicians. But every month, we're out doing inspections. Robert's out on the property. Paul, Lou have gone out years out there. And I could show you photos. If the ponds weren't taken care of, you would have weeds 10 feet tall. You would have primrose bushes. You would have vines. You would have cattails. You'd have torpedo grass. I know you don't understand these different plants, but what you're seeing is everything that Palm Beach County earned. And if you bring out the environmental resource management, they will tell you that this is one of the healthiest littoral environments that you have. We just have underwater native plants, and I got emergent plants, all growing like a little fish tank the first 15 or 40 feet out that you have out there. The law says we just have to maintain the first 13 to 15 feet because that's what your shelf was designed to be. Yes.
I'm a member of the Lakes Committee, and our goal is to bring the lakes back to how they were when we moved in. That's the goal of the committee. There's a lot of different ways that we can do it. Unfortunately, we've only done the basic service up to this point. So now we have to do a lot more to get the lakes back to the way they were. And it's a matter of which way we want to go, because there are several options that cost different amounts. And I don't think we're getting into the cost now because we're not up to that yet. But it will be very transparent for the community to hopefully understand. And this is also a decision that is a board decision. This is not a vote of the community, whatever is done. So that needs to be pointed out as well.
We live on the west end of Lake Number 1, and as the other people who have spoken about the lake on Malta, the exit lake, we at one time had a beautiful water view and now have an ugly littoral grass view. It seems to me at this point that it's going to be up to the board to acknowledge the problem and to decide which option is going to be best for our community to, as Sunny just said, to get the lakes back to the way they used to be when we purchased our property and paid the excess money for the lake view that we now have lost. And I would just like to implore the board to be sure to prioritize this for our community, because our visual, the entrances, the exits, the views that we have from our backyards, they're very, very important to our lifestyle and the enjoyment that we have in this beautiful community. So I'm just going to ask the board to please prioritize this and put the money into it that needs to be put into it, so that we can get this community back to where it was when we purchased our homes.
You've mentioned several different communities have gone about it in slightly different ways. If you lived here, what would you recommend be our first step, our second step? I don't want you to get to 10 years down the road, but what would be the initial step you would recommend that would, as quickly as possible, restore all our lakes to the condition, as Bert indicated, that they were when we moved in?
It would be a twofold. It would be, to be able to dig out, because my dredge attachment can't dredge unless those plants are gone, hand pulled out of there. So if the other one's the digging, the cost to outdig is not worth us to go in, and I could fix all the embankments for less money using that material once those plants are out, to get immediate results and have everybody very happy looking forward into this season going forward, would be to send out and put our markers, so stake out all the lake corners so everybody has a visual in seeing where their 15-foot shelf ends, and then spray, part of the proposals that were submitted, all the spike rush, so you physically see it's dead, like when you spray Roundup on the weeds in the driveway. In about 5 days it turns. However, you get a little wind, we may not have 100% burn, so we follow up with a second treatment. So we make sure we kill all that excessive spike rush. And then I come in with my machines and we come in and cut and around. It's about a month worth of work to get that all gone. The machines, the more machine that I could use and stay away from stepping into the water and removing it, is less spawning beds that we're going to destroy, which means that fish want to go ahead and remake their beds. So I would then look to immediately start the treatments of the native underwater plants. It's native and it's proved. Valencia Lakes, that underwater weed, tape grass, was on their planting plan, just like the spike rush was. And then they had 2 houses that had no plants but underwater fish tank style plants, and 2 houses that had the flowering ones. And all the homeowners were irate about that, is why didn't we get the flowering ones? We are going to have, if we don't maintain the underwater fish tank native plants, which we can. That's not part of the code because that wasn't what went in as your planting plan. So I would go ahead and put that program together, and I would use the generic herbicide, so to save that extra monies out there. We get great success with it. So even though it's not the warranty, what voids the warranty is Mother Nature, not the herbicide itself. So I would recommend that program. Now we have to then spray all the regrowth of the spike rush. So I'd put that maintenance program into play. We then had a proposal to go fix some of the shorelines out here. So as we fix shorelines, we're not going to bring in pine straw or any other compost. We're going to send in the amphibious dredge and dredge out the material right at that 15-foot mark and use it from there going forward. Because if I could get that deeper and stop some of the runners from getting into the next zone, it'll be a lot easier in time, where we could hopefully then reduce the second treatment program over time. So the first thing is immediate results. I couldn't believe how many people were applauding how beautiful it all looked. But then when that tape grass all uprooted on the surface and it was all exposed, then it was, if this is what we have to live with, then get back and put the spike rush and let it regrow back. And I said, well, either start the program or let's pray for some good rain. And we got the rain, and it's night and day what it looks like from a month ago.
I have the mic, so my turn.
Yes.
When I first moved here, I'm not the original owner. I live on the same lake as the people who said from Malta. I live on the opposite end.
Yes.
When I first moved here, it was almost 10 years ago, the grasses and stuff did not go into the middle of our pond. And it was beautiful. It was all even all around, and it was beautiful. Who allowed it to go, I'm saying more than the 13 or 15 feet? It's like halfway into the pond. It's gross. I live right smack dab in the middle, fortunately, so I can see right across, and it's just a big mess. So how did it get to be allowed to go so far into the pond is my one question. The second question is, I think in regards to the board thinking about this in their budget, we're trying to do all sorts of improvements to increase our community to be competitive with, if not better than, other communities. And when people try to sell their homes, I'm telling you, if they looked at my house might be the cat's meow, but when they look out the back and see that yucky lake, would change their mind. So I think the board should think about that in all their renovation ideas, et cetera, to upscale our community. That should be part of their thought. Thank you.
I think this gentleman in the blue hat has a question.
You already spoke.
She's right behind you, in case somebody doesn't hear you.
Is there an acceptable difference between when people are talking about what the lakes looked when they first started out, an acceptable difference between the starting out time and an older, mature lake, but an acceptable look to the older, mature lake? In other words, with a fish tank, you start out, as you say, with an ecological balance that you try to get ultimately, but you have small plants, they grow, you maintain them, they get bigger, you cut them back a little, but they're bigger than what they were when they first started out.
Correct.
So the question would be, is there an acceptable aesthetic look as well as a necessary way of treating things based on the fact that we started out and where we are as a mature lake or an older lake?
Well, we started out which is called bare root plants. So if you go to Home Depot and you buy a plant, one may be in a little pint, it could be a 1 gallon. You could buy a big one already mature in a 3, 7, 10 gallon container, which is bigger and taller trees. So we put in little baby, one plant, a bare root, and we only planted the first 6 feet so it grows out the width of the shelf. The more plants that are thicker in that shelf, the required 13 feet from ERM. So yes, it was 6 feet. We planted them every 2 feet. So the county doesn't say, well, you have to have a plush, thick hedge immediately. You have 2 years until the county will say, okay, you've met your requirement, and they'll give the bonds back to the builder. So it takes 2 years for it to grow out further, grow bigger and taller, and fill in between to get the compliance so that the builder could get his COs to then build the houses, because a builder cannot get a CO until the littorals are initially planted, and then they hold it for 2 years to make sure that the plants do get thicker, fuller, taller, and they do achieve. Maintaining, just like a fish tank, every few months you lower the water, scrub off the algae, maybe pull out some of the plants, because those plants, if it's a real native fish tank with real plants and not artificial, then yes, you pull out those plants. Somebody's got to go ahead and put the cost of doing that. Main reason is the health of the lakes. It's a lot healthier instead of having very shallow ponds, because you got the sun penetrating down now. Once we remove the plants in 2 feet of water, nothing's going to sterilize that soil. So something is going to grow. Something's going to grow in place of. It's then us using more herbicides, and one of the safest herbicides for wildlife, everything, is the Sonar herbicide. We have other herbicides like copper sulfate. Too much copper sulfate could kill off all the shellfish. Shellfish is part of the whole ecosystem. So you got to make sure you have the right amount. And most of our treatments are in the shallow areas. So 95% of our treatments is using our ATV boats or the guys walking with the backpacks throughout there for the maintenance.
Yes, hi, Brian.
Yes.
First, I want to thank you for coming and explaining a very complicated subject with a lot of possible permutations about it, so this is a good start. I want to touch a little bit on shoreline erosion, which you mentioned, you showed up there. It looked like an expensive proposition to fix. It looked like a Leonard Mann house. So a multi-part question. Number one, our specific community, how extensive is that a problem? Do you recommend that we have to deal with shoreline erosion? Second part of that question, give us a rough ballpark figure of how much something like that would cost per linear foot, and how many linear feet of shoreline do we have here? So we can get some sort of sense of how much we're talking about.
I believe we're in around 25,000 plus, give or take, linear footage of your community here, which approximately 5 miles of shoreline. Typically, if we're going to do everything at one time, then a price gets less. I do honor pricing usually for 5 years, 3 to 5, because with inflation of materials and everything else, it's hard to lock in. But I've done a minimum of 3, and some I've done 5. So, for example, every year Valencia Shores, they put in 1,000 feet, 2,000 feet, excuse me. They had more money, they did 2,700 feet. Villaggio, they wanted to stick with some of the bonus, so they said, well, if we give you an extra 1,000 feet, can we do it this year and keep that same honoring price? So the pricing dictates on how many feet. If I just got to come to a 100-foot section, I still got to send my equipment, my machine, so the price per foot gets greater. But on an average cost, I believe we came in, which I normally get anywhere from 40 to 50. I'm going up doing stuff up to 60 to 80 dollars a foot, depending on, do we want my 12-foot folds over to 6 foot, so I'm filling a big 6 foot wide sock, or what we've done is the 3 foot wide sock, which takes out a lot of material, but not as much excess material we have. We got more material than we could fix shorelines. But the cost of the shorelines, if we're looking at 25,000 linear feet at $35 a foot, you're looking probably right around 750, 800,000 over years of restoration to the shorelines.
And how extensive is the problem here? Is this something that you recommend that we need to do?
Well, we have in areas, and yes, because over on Memorial Weekend, a big problem is your landscapers. They're mowing the equipment. You hit a slough area, you hit a washout area, and what you'll tell is we have a steep drop-off, well, that's been eroded away, which means those cannas are going to grow closer to the house. When they grow closer to the house, the homes are built up on an angle. So now it's making the cannas taller because they're coming up higher to your elevation instead of staying down in the zone. So we're going ahead and we're removing all the excessive cannas and determining, is that an erosion issue, because they usually fill in where it's eroded. If not, we're just putting grass back. And the landscapers are keeping it cut, and we're spraying a little 6-inch buffer from where the sod ends to help avoid, because the cannas grow underwater tubers, or they love more dry than wet. They'll grow up your grass and start growing through the grass. But you could cut right on over those. So keeping those out and keeping them controlled good. To go in and physically use that arm digger to dig that out, you could be looking $1.5 million worth of at least, and it's hard to tell, it would be per day, and then the hauling cost. So it's hard to say this is what it will be to cost. So that's why we did a little 15, 20 foot wide, and we removed almost 25 foot wide. Now that's an excessive. Some of the other ponds are only, like we heard, 10 foot outside of the 15 or only 25. That's why we would put the marking stakes out there. So we did the survey and we broke it up into different subdivisions for each territory. The West Lakes were one proposal, the Big Lake was one proposal, and the East Lakes were another proposal out there. So my recommendation would be, as far as removing the excessive areas, once that's gone, if we have and we know we're going to do 1,000 feet, okay, well, then I could send the machine, we could set up, whether it's 100 feet in there, 400 in that lake. If we're removing the spike rush in all the lakes, I've got the access to bring my dredge attachment in. So it'd be half the cost to do all of your shorelines than it would be just to dredge out that material and never address the shorelines. So we have the material right there in your ponds to fix it. So we measured out almost, I believe, 1,000 feet throughout the 16 waterways. Whether it was this corner was only 25 feet or 75. So we have a map of areas, but things change from each season. What was severe, we would want to start with and work our way back. If you're saying, hey, you know what, why wait till a problem? Let's just address it, let's put it in a budget and potentially do it right away, then I could get more aggressive on the pricing out there. Now you're not going to have any problems ever in the future, and now you're able to dredge the entire area using that material in the sock. that we have, depending now which wide, because the $35 a foot is our 6 foot folded over like a taco, call it, is now 3 foot that we're filling. Well, we know we have bigger than 3 foot wide shelves of material, but at least we would take the material right from that 15-foot edge, so we know at least those won't grow any further. And if that's a chance, then it's also easier to maintain the ones that would be further out. Yes.
A moment ago, you threw out a couple of suggestions of what you would do now if you lived here. As a reference point, based on the contract that we have with your firm now, could you provide a percentage of increase to that contract that would cover those new services?
We put in proposals. I didn't have it broken out in percentage-wise, but we have, which is the one-time. The ongoing maintenance is we're just spraying the new growth of spike rush grasses. So it was an additional service to come in and spray if it's 20-foot wide, because right now, I'm not spraying any spike rush. We're keeping any in the weeds, all the dollar weed that grows in the lawns out of our lakes, all the torpedo grass, all your marsh grasses that grow in there. That's what we're contracted for. So we're maintaining mainly 15. Torpedo grass and all these other shoreline grasses do not grow out in front of the spike rush. Those are the underwater weeds that we would then maintain. But any of the bad ones that we maintain, we don't have any exotics. That's what we've been maintaining. What we have is all the native plants that we would have to address with treatments. So if we were able to make it deeper, we may be able to then reduce, in the long run, when the project's completed, we may be able to reduce the additional maintenance for some of the areas if we could get it deep enough and then not have to haul it off property. Hauling it off property is where it gets very expensive. The amount of truckloads you can only imagine you would have to be coming in and out, in and out. You saw how the dredge sock, it's a very clean process. So we're killing 2 birds with 1 stone. We can make that area deeper, but if I'm gonna have a 6 foot wide, that means I could remove 6 foot wide of material. We know we're going almost 2 foot deep on average, so at least I'm getting that 3 foot down to 5 foot where the spike rush doesn't like to grow in. So, and that is something I would recommend over time. Unless, once again, because why? We're getting rid of the spike rush, so aesthetically, your lakes are gonna look much better. So it's only time that is needed to then go deeper on there.
Brian, I think what a lot of the residents and myself, the committee, the board are interested in is which would be the best way to go forward. We're talking about the shore sock, which we saw that with the fabric. We have committed ourselves, the board has and budget has for this year for 1,000 feet to be done. I know we did some on Kona Court. Many people would like to just go see what it is on the corner of, and that was done graciously by Brian, just to show us what it would look like. And it looks great. That takes care of it. We do have a list. Brian has made up a list, a priority list, if we wanted to go forward. Well, not if, but we will be going forward on this 1,000 feet for this current year, that we'll do 1,000 feet of that shoreline. We have a contract. We have a maintenance contract. And as Brian says, it's just a basic contract. What we would have to do is commit ourselves to enlarge this contract or agreement, and either to include all of these other items that need to be done on a regular basis, on a monthly basis, is one way of doing it, or just go gangbusters and just blow everything out separately and then change the contract to that. So which way would be best, to do the new amendment to the, or new agreement that will incorporate all of these other items that have to be done?
I would definitely look to go ahead, because within a month's time, everybody will have the open water again. But we also then have to look to address any of the submerged natives. So that we just have to put on a maintenance program, just like I treat other of the plants. So instead of the exotics, we're now treating all the natives at the same time. The 1,000 feet that was originally proposed to using our traditional pine straw, we're not. If I could remove those where we're doing it also, if the spike rush program is done, that 1,000 feet, that means I'm dredging 1,000 foot, 3 foot wide, 2 foot deep. And I'm gonna take that material in the area where we're dredging, right there. So eventually, as we get around to the whole community doesn't have an erosion issue. We have a shallow sediment issue. However, we could go ahead and reclaim 3 more feet of the land, which will shorten the littorals, which means then we could keep 12 feet to 13 foot width we'll still have the 13 foot, but at least we're coming in more and attacking more on the outside. Because when we have the drought from what was lost, has built up the shelves and made them more shallow. So as soon as you have an inch or two of drought, immediately you see 2 to 4 feet of dry embankment of the plants where you can walk on in between the plants. And then at the most drought time, you see most of the littorals. So I would definitely recommend, knowing that this has been an ongoing issue for years, as far as the areas, as far as the spike rush reduction, as far as areas that are excessive, like the big area we did that test removal there, we have more material in there to ever put along that shoreline. But on a lot of the other areas, we could probably get at least 2/3 of the extended shelf into the sock. So, and once again, I can't tell you which way to have to go with the budget, but I know immediately everybody was ecstatic when the spike rush was gone. I mean, it's a standing O. It's just making sure you're prepared to spend the additional maintenance that is going to follow. Algae will occur. You can't stop it. The good news is we don't have the toxic algae like they have up in the Treasure Coast out there.
Okay, Brian, I have the mic.
Oh,
Okay,
yes.
I have 2 questions. The first one has to do with the fish and bird eggs that are in the lake. A number of years ago, I called and inquired because I was concerned about the littorals that were, getting overgrown and et cetera. And I was told at that time that that stuff is all necessary to be a habitat for the eggs, for the fish and the birds, and that are we going to be tampering with that if we do all this, and what effect will that have? And then I have a second question I'll ask after you answer this one.
No, because we're removing just the spike rush. We're removing the grasses. I'm not removing arrowheads, pickerel weeds. I'm not removing the swamp lily. Those are all the different sizes, different seeds that they provide for the birds. The habitat, the fish that we're spawning within the spike rush and the excessive, well, they're going to just, big fish eat little fish when you don't have plants, but we still have underneath natives that we're just going to manage now. You'll never eradicate or eliminate any of those weeds, so nothing will be happening with the wildlife out
Okay, and
there.
then my other question is, you know our lakes. I mean, you know every one of our lakes,
Sure.
correct? Okay.
Yes.
So behind, in the lake that I live at the head of the Lahana-Kahana Lake, the one between Lahana and Kahana.
Yep.
Okay. There is a huge black pipe above the water line. And I don't know if that's the case in any of the other lakes. And this is even when the water is at normal level. Is that supposed to look like that? Is there supposed to be a pipe that you see all the time, except when we have like a storm like Wilma?
I will have to double check on that pipe, because the culverts are all connected, and usually they're down below. Sometimes they run, is it a big giant
It's a
wide
big,
one?
giant black pipe, and you see it all the time.
Yeah, I'm sure that's part of the control structure or the outflow. I'd have to just double check on Lahana out there. But if it's there, then yes, it's there for a purpose. We get a lot of the residents, the gutters run out. That causes a lot of erosion in a lot of communities. And they'll put some sleeves and run them under the ground out to the lake, and then you see the black tubes that releases the water from the gutters out into the lake. But that would be a culvert out there. Yeah, you're welcome.
I just wanted to find out what the time frames are for doing the lakes. Are we doing all of the lakes at the same time? Because it's not really, if we do one now and we do one in 5 years, that means the people in the lakes are waiting 5 years,
The
with
spike
all of
rush
this-
reduction would all go at the same
At the same
time,
time.
beginning the maintenance, so everybody will have that 13-foot on the interior lakes, 15-foot on the big lake. Everybody would have the exact same.
Okay, so it'd
It
all
would
be
just
done-
be starting with day 1, finishing on day 30 or 40, whatever it takes, how many guys. I'm not just sending the we do, I'm sending both boats in here at times. I've got the guys in the water hand pulling. As much as the dead and the root we pull out, is the slower the regrowth that we're going to get. But regrowth, where we did the test area for just the spike rush cutting, within a couple of months it all starts growing back. Left untreated, it'll be big, thick, and
Right,
full
but I
again.
just wanted to make sure each
It-
lake is
every
going
lake
to
was
be done-
proposed to begin
Right.
all at the same time.
And when you were talking about building up I'm still confused. We're not building out 3 feet with these bags filled.
That's only
and
if we're
then-
gonna be dredging from the lake. So it's not building it so much out as much up, because you lost a lot of vertigo, but we do reclaim about almost 2.5 feet of growth. Those
But
cannons,
you're not reclaiming the land that's there. In other
we
words,
would be
we're not,
reclaiming the land that was once there.
that's grass,
Grass.
so you're making the lakes narrower.
No,
you're-
we're restoring them back to the where, because I could put the sock right at the on, and I could just build up the hump. We gotta keep a 4-to-1 slope going down into the lake. So it's, in a lot of the lakes where you already have about a foot drop off, that foot drop off, those canyons have grown back. So in some of the ponds, if you measure from your property line down to the lake, it may have once been 25 feet, it may only be 20 feet right now in certain areas. So we're reclaiming what's been lost through the erosion.
Okay,
Areas that have not had any erosion, then we're just staying on a maintenance program, so we don't have to fix the lake, we don't have to dredge the pond, we just need to treat the weeds from growing back and losing that view again. Yeah. No, it would be just to go and reclaim where it is. It's not like, you wouldn't even know any difference on it, and the plants would be right there, and the plants would be healthier, because you've lost over the years, just in that first couple of feet, has built up. And that's why when the rain, lack of rain that we have, immediately with the irrigating going on, you immediately see a 4-foot mud line in between that planted area. Those plants, the flowering ones, would then just thicken up right in front of it out there. But the maintenance would have to go on forever, as just no different than when you come in and cut or treat or hedge or spray for the exotics.
Hey, Brian, thanks for the explanations, et cetera. You know, it's technical, and a lot of people don't want to hear the technical end of it, but I appreciate it, along with, I'm sure, many others. The question, not a question, but it's my observation that, and I think, and you can correct me to the end, that the smaller lakes have the major problems, or more of the problems, than the larger lakes with the way the plantings aren't growing in. Some of my people that I've spoken to are all saying, hey, the lakes disappeared. So is it the case with the smaller lakes, or
Yeah,
what's happening?
because the small lakes still have that same size shelf. And if he extended that shelf, the contractor on the machine, then the plants will even migrate a little further into the area. So we did show as a demo, like I've done 3 gratis different demos out here, thousands of dollars worth of work, that at the end of the day, your pricing for your lake maintenance has never changed. It's always been the same. I've never done any special assessments. I don't do a 3-5% increase a year like every other contractor typically do. My costs have risen. So we have, with all these demos taken, if we do 0 projects for the next 5 years, I just lost for a whole year of any profits that we would want to draw from, hopefully. But I want to show that these are things that can be done if you have the appropriate budgets for.
Brian, hi. Thanks for your presentation.
Yes.
And I think you're pretty clear on the lake erosion aspect. It's relatively new, and you laid out what can be done to fix it. But as you just mentioned now, and as you alluding before, many of our homeowners have complained about our lake view for many, many years. And it's always been, well, we're legally limited to what we can do. And lake and wetlands are in, they're doing what they can do. Not once, and I've been on the finance committee as well as some other people here, have we ever cut back the budget for the sake of saving money and not do what was necessary to keep the lake view as it once was. So, but now, it kind of sounds from what you're saying, well, there was option A or option B or option C, you chose option A, the least expensive. I don't think we ever had other options. Why is that changed now?
Well, it was done well over 10 years ago on the Malta Lake at the same time, and it became a major algae problem out there. And then it was the cost to have to come in and continually maintain, and then knowing how many waterways that were out here, because you can't just do one for one and not another for another, because we're dealing with the environment, where this isn't, you cut your lawn and it looks great right after they cut, but if they don't cut for a month, you'll see every weed and everything growing in between the lawn. So these plants are healthier to have for your water, for all the runoff we get. That plant also holds the shoreline right there. So knowing that you had these extended shelves, they would help maintain stabilizing the erosion on the front end, not the back end. It also provided hidance for the underwater aquarium-style native plants that everybody gets from birds feeding from one community to the other, bringing and transporting plants over. So the benefits on a health reason, it's healthier with the plants. On an aesthetic reason, it's not. But it can be done. So it has been proposed years ago, but now it's been coming up a little more and more and more as a major concern. So it's been proposed. I mean, I could go back and look at contracts from years ago.
Well, 10 years ago was before we were born. But like in the last 5 years, nothing's ever been proposed along these lines.
They've been suggested to it. I would have to go take a look and see what proposals have been submitted over the past 5 years. But mainly it was the same maintenance program that we've had from the very beginning. It was an area here and an area there, but collecting it's all upon what the Lake Committee, what the board asked us to want to help provide and to perform. So by having it doesn't mean anybody did anything wrong. You're having healthier waterways out there. By us manicuring it and trying to now control these little shallow areas, we're just adding more herbicides to the water. They are approved herbicides, and I'd feel more comfortable knowing if we're going to be using the fluoridome, which is the sonar or the generic, within the water bodies, going on a mass project like this. Because if I don't use the sonar herbicide and we did the spike rush removal and I got to treat all that excessive algae or the underwater weeds that are creating a lot of the algae, and I use a contact herbicide, it's going to wash into the plants and it's going to hurt those plants, potentially kill those plants off. So sonar does not hurt any of our native plants that we have out there. So I know we won't hurt the native plants, but if I have to use contact herbicides, then I'm going to be battling more algae, and then we're going to lose plants within that 13-foot zone. And it's going to be then aesthetically a lot more challenging, because what's going to happen now is once we get rid of all the excess plants out of the 13 to 15 feet, where are the fish going to migrate? From the shoreline to the 13 feet. That's what's protecting them from a lot of the other fish. And then we have the water fluctuation. So it was never saying, hey, we have the major issue. Yes, we had some areas. We could address a cul-de-sac here or there, but nothing was ever brought to fruition like it is hopefully here in the very near future. Because you will be very happy with the spike rush reduction when it's done. At the end of the day, it just comes down to the budget and the cost, if everybody wants to contribute to it at the same time.
Brian, I'm on Kialani. We have the house 8 years. In general, when the weather gets a little bit more temperate, I'm out on my patio every morning for breakfast, either between 9 a.m. to like 10:30, depending upon when I get up. I've seen your guys out there. You are out there very consistently because I'm out there seeing it. However, 8 years ago, I had a lake view. Now I have a garden view. And what has happened, I usually take my computer outside because I love learning about what's out there that flies in, that eats, and the whole circle of what depends upon what. Mm-hmm. And so depending upon the difference between 8 years ago, when I first went to Wakatahatchee, I really didn't have to go there because the lake that I was sitting on was so prolific with so many. There were 19 different birds that I calculated on my computer that were literally coming, because what I understood was when one kind of bird flies in and does something, another kind of bird does, etc., and it goes down. And then what that does is it increases what's happening in the lake with the life that's in the lake as well. Now, if 2 or 3 birds come, it's a lot. So what I'm asking is, with whatever the solutions are that our board decides will be good for the lakes, once all of these things are done, will this be healthier, and therefore will the birds come back?
Well, we have so much more competition now since this community was built. Every community around you is required wetland plantings. The further west we go, then you have all the Everglades just to the west of us. Birds do migrate different times, different parts of the season. Having that less spike rush, you may not have as many coots potentially nesting out in the area, because we're now probably going to be ending up with 3 foot wide of spike rush, and then the flowering plants for the first 7 to 8 feet, and then a few more feet of the spike rush. So you're still going to get a bird population. Every time we've done drive-throughs, you're correct. You have the egrets, the blue herons, you have everything, the cormorants, the anhingas. The anhingas go underwater, and they'll swim 20 minutes underwater, and they'll herd a lot of fish to a cove, and then you'll see a frenzy, like you said, where there could be 17 different species all going on in the water. It's not going to lessen the oxygen. I'm just not treating with herbicide 10 to 20 foot wide of treatments within there, because the spike rush is acting as a matted root system fighting out, which is, the spike rush is like a heavyweight fighter, keeping out a lot of the other plants and the bad weeds. Our flowering plants are more like a lightweight fighter, and the exotic weeds like to take over that. So we have to use more herbicide to control it. So once we do move out these plants, then we just have to treat the area, but we'll still have oxygen still introduced into the water. Now, if we have a complete drought, where the gentleman was standing on that lake bank, we don't have then the extra 15, 20 feet of plants in the water. Therefore, the oxygen levels can change. If we have 0 plants in the water now because it's so dried out, and we also know we don't have any aeration in the system, then it could slowly, potentially delete the oxygen. As oxygen depletes, algae will start forming and other type of aquatic plant life, and that's the ongoing maintenance that would be needed for there.
Brian, first I want to thank you for the presentation. I think everyone has to understand that over the years, people have been complaining about the fact that the plants have been growing into the lake and they're not getting as much water and such like that. And every once in a while, you would send your guys out, pull out some plants and make it good. But there was never a concerted effort to do something for all the lakes at one time. And what happened was that one person in the community really got very upset about how his lake was and started to push for this. Paul went ahead and formed the Lakes Committee, and this is why everything is, in the last 2 months, has gotten together, because basically the community wants to change how the lakes are to make them better, and this is what's happening. Over the last number of years, people would complain, but it never coalesced into one thing. Now it has. The board has agreed to go forward, however they're going to go forward, but that'll have to do with the monetary thing. But it's understood that there is a problem. The community wants it fixed, and that's where we're going here. The reason for Brian coming and presenting this is to let everyone know what's happening, why it's happening. But the Lakes Committee is working, and the board will work, and we'll go along and do what has to be done. And thank you very much.
And at Valencia Palms, it took almost 10 years for them to approve the same exact situation. Valencia Shores, no, they're letting all those shells grow. They're not reducing. It's strictly a choice upon each community on what they would like to see, and at the end of the day, we can do what we can legally do. We can't do anything about the first 13 feet other than keep filling in plants. Outside of the 13, it's all up to you guys.
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Brian, and thanks everybody for coming. It's 10:30 and the meeting is adjourned. Thanks.